There has to be a sense of danger if I'm to be inspired. The transition from status quo to situations of peril is thrilling. But I have rather high standards, and I'm no fool. I don't want to spend the rest of my days locked away. So I choose my time and place with extreme care. It's a talent I've always had. In truth, it may be that the time and place choose me. The women have to be beautiful, of course. Marceline was beautiful. I, too, was beautiful once. People said so. Beautiful was the term they used, despite its usual association with the fairer sex. They wondered at my blue-gray eyes, my olive skin, not the usual combination, and their sweet flattery continued until it sunk deep into me. That could have bred arrogance, so in a way, one could almost say that what happened was fortunate. The accident, I mean. After the accident, nobody said I was beautiful. The other orphans were all dead, 28 of them in all. So were Sister Cecilia, as well as Grace and Lucy, the two caretakers. Only little Charlie Cabot stayed alive somehow. The sky turned red, and the whole orphanage burnt to the ground in less than an hour. They should have built the place from better stuff. They should have watched me better. I felt badly, though, about Grace. She'd been nice to me on occasion. The Evening Gazette's headline of February 9th, 1923, read, "Tragedy strikes the Mulgore Asylum." The investigators were never able to confirm arson. In any case, I was never considered a suspect, probably due to my age, which was 11. Only an unfortunate victim. But I had miscalculated. The gas caused a small explosion before I could distance myself. As a result, half my face was disfigured. Only later did I see this to my advantage. Toward the end of a lengthy convalescence in hospital, I was fitted with a tin mask like the wounded soldiers. The nurses said it would protect the burn scars from the elements, but I soon realized it would allow me to be seen in public without horrifying the citizens of Lambton. I myself never looked in the mirror when I removed the mask to get washed. The good townspeople were, how to say, highly distressed about the fire. One childless couple, Mr. and Mrs. Bear, from the outskirts of town, offered to take me in. This is called compassion. For me, it was the first time I'd lived in a real house. Charlie Cabot was also taken in by the Wheaton clan, some other people of compassion. I made a mental note of his whereabouts. Mrs. Bear immediately set to fixing up the attic for me. Instead of a straw mattress at the orphanage, I now lay down on a feather bed, and I now had an abundance of scarves, mittens, sweaters, which she sat sitting by the hearth in the evenings. Best of all was the absence of bedbugs and rats. Mr. Bear was good at enticing them into traps. He had a shed out back where he did his carpentry work, kept his tools there. His planes, chisels, hand drills, and whatnot were hung in a wall cupboard that he built. This made an impression on me, the organization of it all. The winter I turned 12, he made me a sled for my birthday that was the envy of the neighborhood boys. They were always asking for a go on the thing. It was a shame when it burnt to nothing in the fire. I was too big for it by then anyway, since by 14 I was almost my full 6 feet. At their funeral, the townspeople came up to me with condolences on the fact that I was, once again, an orphan. The part of me that hadn't been burnt in that first fire was still beautiful. The other part was still better behind my tin mask. The police did question me, but as mentioned, I had learned the value of organization, and I was organized. I lined up the perfect alibi in that I was sleeping over at Charlie Cappett's that same night. It was Charlie who slipped out to torch the place and got back before the fire brigade arrived. The only reason he did it was because I told him, if he didn't, I'd come one night and do it to the Wheatons, and he believed me. Would I really have done it? Most likely, though it would not have been the ideal, and less than the ideal is less than I aspire to. After the incident at the Bears, of course, I couldn't trust Charlie. When trust becomes an issue, that issue must be addressed. There were a lot of things I could have done, but he was only a child, you understand. There was a certain bond with him, and he looked up to me. But for safekeeping, I so ingratiated myself with the Wheatons that they were hard put to believe me capable of anything but benevolent undertakings. The benevolence of the Wheatons themselves knew no bounds. This is called compassion. They insisted I stay with them until such time as I could make my own way. In the meanwhile, I was to attend school with Charlie. Learning was a thing I was never averse to. I was good at it and received favorable reports, better than Charlie's, whose reports were usually a disappointment to the Wheatons. This gave me the opportunity to set myself up as a tutor to him, since I did pretty well in everything. Geography was a favorite of mine, the maps, the faraway places, but the mistress had a passion for penmanship, and she took a fancy to my handwriting, which I practiced by signing my name over and over again. James E. Coyle. I don't know the origin of this name, except for the E. That was my own invention. Sometimes when questioned, I said it stood for Edward, sometimes Everett, depending on my mood. I could have said it stood for elegance, or possibly enigma, but they'd have thought it was Barney. In any case, a middle initial lends an air of distinction to a signature, does it not? When I went up to the collegiate, I had to leave Charlie midway and take a different route to school. On the way back, when the times coincided, I would meet him at a designated point, a big willow tree by the side of the playing field. That day, February it was, a snow squall arose, making it near impossible to see from afar. I thought I saw two figures approaching the appointed spot. Coming nearer, I saw Charlie with a woman. He was huddling close to the tree, using the hanging branches as a protective veil. The woman was brushing them aside, closing in on him. The wind prevented me from hearing her words, but they were producing a look of dread on Charlie's face, which I could now make out quite clearly. When the woman became aware of my presence, she turned. She wore a rose-red shawl around her head that covered most of her features, just as the ski mask I wore covered mine. I had only a moment's glance into eyes like slate before she fled across the field into the distance. Charlie was shaking. I put my arm around his shoulder like an elder brother might. His chest was heaving. He was sobbing so forcefully that I couldn't get the gist of the conversation from him. We were halfway home before he began to speak coherently. In essence, what he finally managed to spit out was that this woman in the field had referred to herself as his mother. She said she had come to take him home. It was not unknown to me that Charlie, on occasion, had a penchant for fabrications, pure cock and bull stories, but I was not convinced that this was one of them. I looked back the way we had come, then gave instructions to go straight home to the Wheatons, sit tight and keep his mouth shut. I adjusted his hat and collar and gave him a push in the right direction. I went back to the field. She'd said home. Did this whore have a home then? That's what I determined to find out. I needed to make haste before the snow covered all traces of her existence. Fortunately, the indents of a woman's boots were still there, in keeping with the path she had taken. Not many people were out in the heavy squall, and I could distinguish her tracks after they left the field. I followed them all the way to Pike Street, where they disappeared into the slush of the busy street. I was about to return when I spotted the rose-red shawl coming out of Mayberry's tavern. A man followed closely behind her, and I saw her slow down and take his arm. They continued on together till Baytown, a neighborhood close to the railway station that the Wheatons would have called unsavory. I followed the two of them to a rooming house on Drew's Lane. By then, the sky was darkening and the temperature dropping. It didn't matter. I knew what to do. The next morning, Charlie didn't want to get out of bed, let alone go to school. But in the end, I walked him to the tree to prove there was no one waiting for him there. I was certain of her line of work and that it would curb any desire to be gallivanting around in the early morning. I told him he needn't worry about that woman again, and he was reassured. Charlie always believed everything I told him. I watched him trudge along to school, looking over his shoulder every few minutes. I waved and watched till he was out of sight. Then I went to my own classes, mainly to buy time, keep out of the cold. But of course, after school, I didn't return to the Wheatons. Instead, I walked over to Pike Street. I had money in my pocket and the bag I had prepared. There was still time. I bought a ticket to a picture show playing at the Century. Some frivolity with a needed page, as I recall. Then it was time. I headed over to the Mayberry.